People do that, and they seem to be more respectful than
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are delighted to celebrate Alissa York as she has returned to Winnipeg tonight for the launch of her new novel, Far Cry, a statement to which you may applaud dramatically. See, the fear of dealing with technology is you just have this thought when you're behind a podium that, did I actually start the video to YouTube? And yes, I did. So greetings to everybody online. Now, this event is co-presented by our very good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. You'll be hearing a little bit more from Festival Director Charlene Deal at the end of the event, but suffice to say, we're always delighted whenever we have an opportunity to team up with them to present incredible literary events like this one. Just a few quick housekeeping notes, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about the speakers tonight and the wonderful book we're here to hear a little bit more about. But before that, I will just mention that following the conversation, there will be time for questions from you folks. This applies to those of you gathered here and also those watching online. If you are here, please just put up your hand and I will rush over to you Donahue style with a handheld microphone. This is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It is simply to ensure that those watching at home can hear what you have to say. If you are watching at home and would like to participate, you are very welcome to do so. Please just write any questions you might have for Alissa in the chat, and we will get to them as time permits. The only other note I will mention is that at the close of the event, we'll ask that you all just remain seated for one moment. This is just to ensure that we can safely transport Alissa to the signing table, which is located immediately beside our cash desk. And Charlene will have some thrilling additional notes about signing procedure for you at the close of tonight's event. But that is more than enough for me, although you will now have to put up with a bit of a ramble. Alissa York's internationally acclaimed novels include Mercy, Effigy, shortlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, Fauna, and most recently, The Naturalist. Stories from her short fiction collection, Any Given Power, have won the Journey Prize and the Bronwyn Wallace Award. Her essays and articles have appeared in The Guardian, The Globe and Mail, Brick Magazine, and elsewhere. York has lived all over Canada and now makes her home in Toronto with her husband, the artist Clive Holden. She teaches creative writing at the Humber School for Writers. If her previous novel, The Naturalist, the winner of the Canadian Authors Association Fiction Award, wound us down the Amazon, in Far Cry, York takes us to the year 1922 at Far Cry Cannery, in a small West Coast fishing village where we meet the recently orphaned kid and hear the story of her honorary uncle, Anders. One risks falling into cliche whenever you start spouting lines like, the environment in York's work is as much a character as those that populate it. But it remains entirely true. The scent and sound of the waves, the thick fog that often descends, permeate each page of this book. Far Cry is flush with incantatory prose that lulls the reader into a state of near hypnosis, and more than once I found myself kind of shaking off the spell that it cast while looking up in its pages. We started this Collaborative Writers Festival series with Some Hellish from Nicholas Herring, and while that book leaned toward an all-encompassing kind of heady maximalism, York's prose is rhythmic, lean, and evocative. And each short line hovers in the air and seems to hint at so much more than what is on the page. It's redolent with the universal in the quietest and most magical of ways. Luckily, we have the perfect guide to explore this world. Your host for the evening, Bruce Symaka, humbly submitted his bio as a bibliophile who worked for a number of years with the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. And not that that isn't true, but it belies what an incredibly deep reader and tremendous host he is. Hearing Bruce speak about books, hearing him speak to their authors is always such a pleasure, and I'm truly delighted that he's on board to steer the conversation at this event. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bruce Symaka and Alissa York.
I just want to say that I think that's the best introduction ever of anything anywhere. Oh, you win. You win the prize. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'm thrilled too. That is lovely to hear too. And much nicer than anything I will say about your book, which is a beautiful, lovely, lovely book. First thing I want to say is it's a beautiful, gorgeous book. And also, Alissa, thank you so much for paying for my lunch today.
Oh, you were, and I noticed that you have a different sweater on
I do have a
now.
different
You're
sweater.
such a clothes horse.
It's-
Two sweaters, Symaka.
I'm
I'm wearing the same sweater from lunch.
But you got 3 Scrabble games in. Apparently, after what I heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a really, really beautiful book. So I just have a few questions about it to grill you on it.
Yeah.
Um,
Ready.
because John set such a high standard, now I have to be deep.
Yeah.
So John mentioned the setting of the book in 1920s. Takes place at a couple of times, but the 1920s in the British Columbia coast, northwest British Columbia. So why? What about that place and especially that time that really intrigued you?
Yeah, it's a really, it's an interesting process how books come about, right? So I think with this one, what really happened, well, a couple of things happened. So my childhood, grew up in Alberta to begin, but then on the BC coast, and a lot of time spent in the boat with my dad and my brother and doing a lot of fishing. And so I think that was in there working away. And then at some point, I don't know, 8 years ago or something, there was a cannery in there. And I don't know why. Usually I have a bit more of an idea of where these things come from, but it was just like, there's a cannery. And so I thought, okay, well, I don't know a lot about canneries. Actually, you know what occurred to me recently in the Stone Angel? Hagar, she escapes, right, from where she's living with her son and daughter-in-law, and she goes to an old abandoned cannery. And I think maybe some of the description of that space also was there, because those Margaret Lawrence books, I've read them over and over, and maybe the cannery partly came from Margaret Lawrence. But anyway, the cannery was there. I started to read about canneries, and that took me to the northwest coast of BC pretty quickly, to a real town on Rivers Inlet called Good Hope, which I loved reading about, and it inspired a lot of the ideas around Far Cry. And that time, early on, somehow I had the idea that the Great War played a part. And so then it was like, okay, it's not too long after the Great War and then I had a feeling that this character of Anders was a certain, he was in his early 60s, maybe he felt that way in the present. And so then you do, the math and kind of moves that way.
It's, I want to talk about Anders and get to, let's talk a little bit about Anders, who's Norwegian.
Yes, unlike me.
Like you. So why is he Norwegian? Like all my questions are why?
Why did you do that?
Why 1922?
Why? Oh, well, the truth of that is sort of similar to the cannery, that it's like a feeling. And with Anders, the feeling was there's a winter swimmer, there's a wild swimmer in the book. And I just started to read about winter swimmers and where they came from and where there were longstanding traditions of that way of living. And so I read, about people doing it in Russia and Scotland and various places. And then somehow when I read about it happening in Norway, and then I read about the Lofoten Islands, which I knew were there but didn't know anything about. And then there's a kind of a symmetry there. So the northwest coast of BC, islands and what are effectively fjords, and then islands and fjords, and that kind of started to speak to each other across. Dennis Lee has this line that I love about the point at which the poem begins to sing across inside itself. And I think that novels do that too, like all kinds of written works will do that. So I think that was one of the ways that it kind of made a connection. And so it didn't take too long for me to understand he was Norwegian. And then there's that whole thing about how interesting it is to think about somebody telling a story like that he's a writer who would never think of himself as a writer, right? That's part of the trick of the book. But for somebody for whom it's their second language in which they're doing that, is interesting to think about too. And how do you get there? How do you get to that level of language? All of those were sort of parts of the puzzle of the book.
And his part of the narrative, because the book is in two narratives, it's in two narratives, and his part is in first person because he's writing.
Yeah, he's basically telling his story to Kit, and then in the present and going into the past, and his past and her past, and the story of her parents and how they came into his life and how he came into her life. And yeah, so and then at the same time you have Kit's life in the present kind of interweaving with that. And of course her memories of her past interweaving with the story that he's telling her about her. Well, it's complicated. I don't recommend it.
Because Kit is in third person too. Right?
Kit is in third person, yeah. And early on I thought, oh, can you do that? Oh, come on in, friends. Don't stand there at the back, silly sausage.
Can you do that?
You can. Well, yeah, because I remember already this book was well underway, but at some point I was reading a novel by Kim Fu, the title of which eludes me at the moment, but it was all these different points of view of all these girls that had been to summer camp together, but the stories were like them at the summer camp and then them later. And then one of them was one of their sisters, right? Right? Yeah. And I thought, but wait, why? And then I thought, well, because it's fantastic. It works. And that's why you can do it. You can do it if it works. So yeah, I thought first person, third person. I've written enough books. I'm just going to do what I want from now on.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. Woo!
That's all it takes.
Unlike when I was writing that book about all the polygamous horse ranchers, that was just for purely commercial purposes.
Your publisher is thrilled, I'm sure.
I know. They're always just like, look at this weird thing that York made now.
It was several years between The Naturalist and
Yeah, I got a job, dude.
It
takes a long time. It takes a long time to write a book.
That's what I hear.
Except for those people that do it really quickly. Stop that.
I know. It's unfair. Unpleasant.
I do really love the research process though.
I actually want to talk to you about.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you love the research process? So I have no questions. I'll just.
Okay, I do love the research process. I do. Yeah, I love it. Okay, so the thing of it is when I was just a young pup and working on the short stories in the first book, editor right here, John Sampson, our Writer Ring Publishing. It's great to be back in Winnipeg. Back then, like if I had to research something, I was really resentful about it and like, oh, all this work, and I really just want to do the writing. And then I had all the ideas for the first novel, which were all these things that I didn't know anything about. And then I learned doing that, oh, this is my process. And I learn a bit and it gives me an idea and I need to learn more and it gives me an idea and so on and so on. And now I love that so much. I love taking millions of notes and making recipe cards, and I love it all.
Well, because the acknowledgements section is like 2 or 3 pages, 2 pages, and most of it is books.
Yeah.
And of all sorts of interesting subjects. So it was so interesting reading after I finished the novel to see all these books that you were looking at.
I always want to tell people about the books that I've read, because so many of them are great books too, right? Like especially, I keep telling people the one that the epigraph is taken from, Shark Drunk by Morten Stongsnes.
Oh, him.
I don't know if I said it. Are there any Norwegians here? No, that's how you pronounce it. And anyway, it really is an amazing Shark Drunk.
Yeah, it's a great title.
Shark, yeah, and it wasn't the original title in English, but that's what they ended up on. And anyway, Aaron Morey said this thing about translating, which was, I love this book and I want to translate it so you can love it too. And I feel that way about acknowledgements pages. What was your question?
Now I have a statement. Years ago, I was talking to John Brand when she was with the Writers Festival years ago, before I worked there. And she was talking, I was interviewing her, and she mentioned that about research for one of her novels. And then she laughed and she said, research, I'll just sit on the bus and look at people make up stories about them. So maybe you should try that.
I know, yeah.
Just make stuff up.
Well, Helnedzeki, am I saying it right? I don't know. Okay.
He's Norwegian, so.
He's not. There was one time where he said something like, "Oh, I just make everything up," and I thought, boy, people are different. I mean, I feel like if I make something up and one person went, "That's not right," and got thrown out of the story, I'd be upset. There's always somebody who knows more than you do, and there will always be the collector of antique farm machinery who will write to you and tell you that in fact that baler that makes bales that shape was not invented for another 6 years. But in general, I like to get it right.
Has anyone here worked at a cannery? Oh, so you're safe
there too, but it's all accurate.
Yes, well, yes, I saw the reading list, although I haven't had an opportunity to check all the references.
I love getting it right so that it's right to people who know, but I also actually feel like it's a big part of the magic of imagining it fully myself, and then that is required in order to get it across.
And even though there's lots of reading that you've done for the book, it doesn't seem like a research novel, one of those novels that just seem filled of data.
Yeah, the research dump, the info dump. Yeah, and you really have to have, you have to be disciplined, and you have to say, I love this thing, but I can't put it in the book because it's stretching the scene out of shape, or it's an info dump, and I'm sacrificing the story here, I'm sacrificing the rhythm, whatever it is, you can't do it. It's not right.
It's not right.
Don't do it.
I haven't written any novels, so I'm just going to read It's Not Right.
Okay, good.
Let's, you want to do a reading?
Okay, let's read like a little short bit.
Yeah.
So as Bruce was saying, Anders, this is 1922, Anders is 62, Norwegian storekeeper at Far Cry Cannery, and as it opens, it's the day of the funeral of his best friend Frank, and Frank's wife Bobby left the year before, and they left their daughter Kit. They both left their daughter Kit, who's his Anders' de facto niece. So I'll read you a little bit after the burial. This is Kit. Kit's dad didn't want her fishing out in the skiff for various reasons. But now Frank is gone and Kit can go out in the skiff. So as soon as they get him in the ground, she goes to the manager and gets her fishing license. She's going to get used to the feel of a skiff again. This is before the season opens, but she's just getting used to the boat. Moving into the cannery's shadow, Kit makes her way along the wharf. Men hunker in their skiffs, checking their nets, patching their scrappy sails. A dozen or so kids roam the docks. Not a woman in sight. The fishermen's wives packing the week's grub boxes, the washers and packers scrubbing the cannery down. One turn of the clock until the fleet goes out, another until the collector boat steams into the bay with the season's first catch in her hold. It's where Kit belongs, out there over the returning schools. Her father had long trusted her fish sense. She knows how to find them, my girl. She's got the nose. More like the ear. It was akin to listening, reaching a thought out to where they might be. Third dock along, skiff number 44. Kit looses the painter line from the cleat and steps aboard. Already she feels calmer, drifting back from the dock, settling herself on the thwart. Taking up the oars, she pulls the line of narrow strokes until she's clear of the other boats. Rowing lets you watch what you leave. Far Cry Cannery and its quarter mile of town, strung along the bay's eastern shore. Boardwalk linking shacks to sheds to proper little cottages with dark green doors. Steep stairs cut up through the brush. to where the cookhouse and the China house jut from the slope. Above it all, the slash of the waterline trail. Out on the headland, Uncle Anders' cottage sits alongside the store. Nothing but boardwalk and scrub from there up to the manager's house on the point. She's passing it now, pulling round to come level with the mouth of the bay. Surprised to see the parlor windows open, curtains sucked out to flump on the wind. Of course, Mrs. Knox isn't there to keep them closed. She stayed behind in the city this year, too sick to make the trip north. And now another unexpected sight. The manager himself, home instead of holding forth at the wake. Stepping out his front door to stand among the flower tubs on the porch, he catches sight of her and waves. Wave back, kitty cat. Her mother's voice in her ear, whether Kit wants it or not. Never hurts to have a friend. Kit raises her hand briefly before closing it again on the oar. Knox waves on as though she's leaving for good rather than just out for a row. Shit for brains, her father would say, if he could. Kit rows out into the inlet, the mountains tipping up into view. This side of the headland is still mostly wild, her cabin just visible among the trees. She ought to be up there now, checking her gear, resting. A week of gill netting in the skiff on your own is no joke. She could ask around for a boat puller, but what man would agree to row for a girl? More to the point, whose company could she stand? In open water now, she glides for a time, her oars suspended. Evening light, the sea all around her. She'll manage on her own. That's Kit.
Talk a little bit about Kit.
Let's talk about Kit.
What about it?
Let's do it. What do you want to know?
What do I want to know about Kit? I like when you reminded me that sentence where she said whose company she could keep. Right?
Yeah,
Whose
who she
company
could stand in the
she
boat.
could stand
Yeah.
in the boat. Because I was thinking about the town that they're in,
Mhm.
which is on one hand, it's very remote, right? And not surrounded, it's surrounded by lots and lots of, I mean, there's water on that side and then woods on this side, first on this side.
Yeah, and mountain basically just kind of goes
yeah.
like this, right?
So on the one hand, there's so much space, but it's also really claustrophobic, especially during the canning season,
Mhm.
where everyone seems to know everyone's, or thinks they know everyone's business,
Mhm.
because there are lots of secrets. There's lots of stuff that secrets are stuff people don't talk about.
Both.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, yeah, how claustrophobic the town is all year round. In winter, there's basically no one there. The canning season is filled with people.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, you're thinking like a landlubber.
it's live where I live.
Yeah. Right, because I mean, that idea of like clinging to a coast like that, where if you can go for a walk, but you're walking like that. And but Kit, to her, she just wants to get in a boat.
Yeah.
I mean, she swims. Anders teaches all of them to swim. And she likes to swim, but really she wants to be in a boat and she wants to be out fishing. And yeah, and it's an interesting thing to think about a place like that, that is really, like there's a line somewhere in the boat and in the book about how it's like a proper town during the season and a ghost town the rest of the time. Like for the rest for I don't know, 8 months of the year, it's the three of them and the dog living there. And then suddenly there are 200 people from all over the world. These fishers come from Norway and Japan and Greece and like all over the place. Even the odd Australian ended up there.
Even in Australia.
Even an Aussie.
They're everywhere. And then also when during the canning season, Knox comes in, the manager comes in, and we won't say anything more about him or his wife.
Well, you've got to have an enemy of some kind.
No, he's the enemy.
Well, it's not that simple, but
Okay.
no. Okay, so they're playing cribbage all the time Frank and Anders are they just want to play cribbage and drink. And when they want to work, play cribbage, drink, work, play cribbage and drink. And I know that sounds like a dull book, but it's totally not. It's a great story. All kinds of stuff happens, but there's a lot of cribbage playing too. And why did I mention that? Oh, because Knox, when Knox comes, the game is not nearly as enjoyable for them, right? They have to let him win sometimes because he's that kind of big baby. And he's the boss, and it's not as good a cribbage game when Knox is around. So if that's not an enemy, I don't know what is.
That's true. That's true. And his wife.
And his wife.
Yeah.
She's putting on airs now.
Yes, because someone has to maintain these social niceties and.
Yeah, exactly. She's in the manager's.
Village.
She's in the manager's house out on the point, and there's that whole thing where she's discussed. I mean, cannery towns, they don't smell very good, but everybody there has to get used to it. But she doesn't want to get used to it, and she actually keeps the windows closed and actually has the blinds closed a certain amount of time. And she's in a pretty beautiful place, like a place a lot of people would like to be able to go to.
But she'd rather be in Vancouver.
She'd rather be down in Vancouver, yeah, where it's fancier.
Looks fancy.
Mhm.
Well, depends. Vancouver has its.
Yeah, her part of Vancouver is fancier.
fancy.
Because she's from a kind of a big deal family, but I'm not even gonna say what her husband says about her, but she's not the daughter that people wanted to marry from the fancy family. So she's the other one.
Exactly. She's the other one.
Yeah.
She's a fascinating character with a weird name.
If anybody's from Vancouver or knows Vancouver, if you remember the Woodwards family, or was it Woolworths? Woodwards. There was also a Woolworths, but yeah, Woodwards, and they had the catalog and everything. So she's from a family kind of like that.
She's posh. She's bushy.
She is.
Bushy. You mentioned the dog.
Oh yeah.
And when John was giving his beautiful introduction, he talked about how nature's always a force. Oh, there's an awful putting it. Nature is always an element. That's even worse. Nature is always a part of all your books in different ways. And here was not only the setting, but also I love the two dogs. They were two of my favorite characters in the book. They're just so beautifully presented, and their presence is always there, and
Thank you.
they're just so real.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with dogs, and so, I mean, pets are, the pets are just as important member of the family as anybody. And I never, there are two dogs, because there's Shiga, the first one, and that means shadow, and then one of Shiga's puppies. Shiga's a male, but he sires some puppies. I won't give it away. There's a great story about how that happens. And then one of his puppies is Lise, which means light. And so there's a kind of a generational thing with the dogs. Get a good decade of Shiga, and then you get about a decade of Lise. But I mean, for me, if I'd be writing a scene, I would always be thinking, where's Shiga right now? What's Shiga doing? Where's Lise? Just as you would with anyone else who's a member of the family. And I just love I love the pack of that they are in the book. And they have a lot of that same stuff going on in their pack. Dogs, if there's a big growling dust up, they're not afterwards going, I don't know if we're still friends. They're just we're a dog pack. Of course we're sticking together.
That's what packs do.
Exactly.
And Lise says, I'm not going to say anything else. She's lovely.
I'm glad you like them.
So shadow.
I always want here's my great goal in life that I've once achieved that I'm aware of. So in fauna, there's a dog, a big dog named Billy. And someone told me once, I don't like dogs. I'm scared of dogs, but I really like Billy. And I was like, okay, my job here is done.
There you go. Well, that was a good run.
I just kept writing anyway, but I'm hoping it'll happen again.
Oh, I'm sure it will. So what's percolating?
Oh, Well.
Because you opened it up.
Yeah, it takes a long time. So right now it's research time, and I'm reading a lot about sharks.
Oh.
There are some sharks in this one. Some good shark stuff happens in here. And then there's more shark stuff. My parents are Australian, so I grew up with some shark stories, and there might be some Australian shark stuff in the next one.
It's hard-hitting shark info.
Sharks, I mean, there were quite a few years where my husband Clive, we had this sort of thing where he had to stop me talking about sharks. He'd be like, okay, honey, that's enough. Like, and then they have this skin, which is like, because they have this, you know how people say, oh, you can't rub a shark the wrong way, or like, because it's like sandpaper. Those are called denticles. And what they basically are, they're not like skin cells, they're like teeth. A shark is covered in teeth, little tiny teeth. What more can I tell you? I mean, so much more.
So much more. There are sharks in the books. There are sharks in the book. We can also talk about, because there are all sorts of different, for a book that's not very long and it reads really, really quickly. No, but just because it flows by so beautifully.
Thanks, man.
It just flows so beautifully and lightly somehow. So
I cut all the bad stuff out.
oh my God. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think we all read books where some should
People didn't.
do that. But but there were strands that only after I sort of put the book down, I realized sort of the resonance. Like racism isn't a big part of the novel, but it's a strand that runs through the entire story, right? I mean, as you mentioned, China House, where all the Chinese cooks go, or not the Chinese cooks, but the Chinese cannery workers go.
Yeah, and most places would have a Chinese cook. And I mean, of course, when you're researching, well, if you research anything about anything, you come across racism because this is the world we live in. But so I read a lot about working class history in Vancouver and the West Coast, and so many great stories and so many like painful stories and so many stories of oppression and yeah, the stuff that the Chinese Canadians endured in beggars belief.
Both in Vancouver.
In Vancouver and in the canneries and in
certainly.
the, yeah, like just unbelievable working conditions, and the whole idea that these people should work for half the pay of these people, that makes sense, that it ever makes sense.
And so casual, right? Without saying, maybe some of the characters are just so casually racist.
Yeah, that's just the air that they breathe,
Mhm.
right? They don't even ever evaluate that in themselves.
And then there are other prejudices that we won't get into that are also underlying.
Yeah, kind of understood and often not even named, but everybody's trying live by them or live around them or all the pain, the ongoing pain that results from that.
That's a great way to sell a book.
And there's lots of love and swimming.
And cribbage.
Lots of swimming. There's some beautiful swimming in this book, man.
Winter swim. I don't swim. It sounds terrifying. Swim. Why would you make it even harder?
Well, this is part of the thing about writing fiction, right? Is like, I'm too chicken to go swimming in deep ocean water. Well, my dad wasn't. My dad was an Aussie and he was a surfer, and we'd be in, whatever ocean place he'd get in the water, and he'd just go and you'd see him like getting tiny out there in the water. And I remember being so scared as a child, and he always came back. He was an incredibly strong swimmer. And I love that idea of some people not being afraid. I'm not a bad swimmer, and plus I'm always thinking about the sharks, right? That's a problem when you're swimming. Even if I'm in a lake, I'm like, but there could be one, couldn't there? Maybe not in Lake Winnipeg because it's so nice and shallow for so far. You can actually properly relax.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay.
With my dotage, I'll take her swimming. So I can swim.
You should.
No, it's terrible.
People drown. It's the non-swimmers who drown, dude.
Well, that's it, yes. And I'm going to keep it that way.
Okay, good.
I think that makes sense. Enough about me. Are there questions? Do people have questions?
Caleb, you have a question. No, I'm just kidding. You just were playing with your jacket.
John? Oh, there you are.
Bruce?
Yes. Are there questions?
Are there any online questions? Is the enormous audience online wants to know? Yeah, John, other John.
How long did it take you to write?
John says, how long did it take me to write the book? Where are we now? 2023. When did the last one? Probably 6 years. Yeah, but I mean, there's longer, but then this one was done a while ago, and it took a while for them to bring it out. Stuff happened during COVID, right, with publishing schedules and yeah, I'd say 6 years, but I can't really write full time anymore because I teach full time. So, but I don't know, I feel like I have this thing now where I think, is the book alive? The book is alive. Is the book moving forward? It's moving forward. And then I just feel, mostly I feel content. Yeah, back to John.
What is your writing process?
Oh my God, that's a long question. I'm gonna nutshell it. Okay, my writing process is have weird ideas like, oh, there's a cannery in it or something like that. Start reading, take millions of notes, keep files, cross-reference the files to recipe cards once I have ideas for scenes, like scene where Kit goes out in the skiff and, you know, rows out of the bay for the first time. And then if I need any of the files that I've been researching to write that scene, I'll get those pieces of paper out of their files when I'm going to write the scene so that I don't get all tangled up and go, oh, I don't know how to write that, and then get depressed because novels are too hard and leave my desk and never write it. Don't do that. So that's how this whole thing came about. And so I'll have the card and I'll have the piece of paper and I write the scene and I write them in whatever order makes sense. So like in this one, I wrote all of Anders and then I wrote all of Kit. But I had the ideas for lots of scenes before that, and then I will print it all up, put it on the floor, move it around, tape together chapters, put it back in the computer, read it, print it up, put it on the floor, move it around, figure out if things are missing, write scenes that are missing, that kind of thing. Then read it, you know, read it, edit it, read it, edit it, read it, edit it, read it, edit it, and then show it to Clive. Okay, John, you get one more and then somebody else is gonna ask you a question.
So
Then Kaylin has one.
You write at the computer as opposed to longhand.
I write longhand for the first draft. Yeah, I do, because once I got writer's block, and that was when I said, oh, I'm wasting time with all this longhand writing and I need to put it directly in the computer and save time. And then I started deleting things before I knew what I was doing and started editing before I'd finished writing and messed myself up for about a year. And so now I'm back to longhand. The other great thing about it is then your first draft is like that. Look what I did, made this. How about you, Caleb? You have a question now.
Just wondering if you,
Wait, Donahue's coming.
Yeah.
Sprightly,
That's
hopping
a
down the
reference.
aisle. That was not at all like Donahue. That's way better. Okay, go.
Do you ever in your research find characters, real life characters from the past that no one else knows about that you've discovered in your research that you're just like, I could import this person whole into my book and no one would ever know. And they're a great character. So I would do that all the time.
Yeah,
Process.
that sounds more like what Caleb would do. No, I have never, but definitely I'm pulling bits and pieces all the time. And there are pieces like from your life and from read this and from saw this photo. And like Anders, for example, early on in one of the books that I was looking at, there was a photograph and I went, oh, now I know what he looks like. It was just him, right? That thing. And then I knew, like, he just had a feeling of lost love about him. And I didn't know. And again, in one of the books, someone looked over their shoulder at the photographer in this particular way, at this sort of like, and I went, oh, and I understood that. So pieces, and then like from your own life too. So for example, Frank, Kit's father, who's a really complicated character, good and bad, and the bad is pretty bad. But there's a thing about him where Kit is small and, oh, now I'm gonna get all teary. I know I was gonna cry at someone. Anyway, she comes to him and he just sort of holds her like a dad does. But it's like there are coals in his belly. He's that hot, and she's used to the heat of him as part of who he is. That's my dad. Like when I was a child, I have such a strong memory of snow up your mittens and your hands are just frozen. And then I just remember my dad going, pulling up his sweater and going, put him here. And I'm just going, so it didn't actually make the sound. But so that sort of stuff, right? It's that, but I don't think I've ever managed to import somebody whole. I would love to, that would save time. That's a great idea. I'm gonna use that. You're gonna be in the next one. Just get ready.
As a thief.
And Leander, you're gonna be in there too.
As a thief, just.
Yeah.
So yes, you can just make photocopies and take big photocopies and do some cutting and then sort of tape together.
I print up and.
But there's your book from other books.
From other books. Oh, those kind of
Yeah,
photocopies.
those
Yeah.
photocopies.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Did you have a question or were you stretching, Johnny?
No, I was gonna.
Okay, let's do this.
I was thinking, I often think about, you told me once that your grandfather wrote a book called Dogs of My Life.
Yes.
And,
You often think of that. I want to
do
get you a
often
copy
think
of that.
I would love to see a
Oh
copy
my
of that.
God.
So,
So
do you-
good.
Yeah. Do you think so is there a family line of people who've kind of encouraged you to think about how to tell a story that way?
Yeah. Dogs in My Life by Bill McNally is like a chapter.
Say it in my accent.
So my granddad, I've got to wait a minute, I've got to find it. There it is. My granddad was in the hospital. He didn't have too long to go. And my mum had gone back to Australia. And he said, what am I going to do? And she said, well, Dad, you've always said you wanted to write a book. And he said, yes, Sally. That's not her name, but that's what he calls her. Yes, Sally. I think I should write about the dogs in my life. And
I'm tearing up.
he wrote this amazing chapbook, all the stories of the dogs in his life. And there was a line in it, like there was one of the guys in the village who was literally, this was the line, was a few kangaroos, and no, you had kangaroos loose in the top paddock. That was that guy's problem. Anyway, yeah, we've got to republish that, don't we? We've got to get it out there. Anyway, what was the story? Oh, yeah, so the line of stories. And I think too, my mom, when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, in there, my mom wrote poetry. She published a couple of books of poetry, but I remember, this is such an important part of my life. I remember my mom sitting at her desk working on poems and just watching her there, how totally focused she was and how important it was to her that she got those words right. And I remember how beautiful she was when she did that, right? And she was really at her most thrilling as a human being when she was working on her poetry, I think. And then, sometimes I'd go to a reading and my mom would read some poems, and that was always really thrilling too. And then I think, like, for my dad, I don't really get that side of things, but my dad is just like, he had such a work ethic. He was just so, he would just take something on and do it, right? So I think that whole, like, I don't know how to do this, but I can do it. I don't know how to do this, but I can do that. My dad was really a big part of that. Like, he came to Canada from Australia, and then, I don't know, a year later, he's curling champion of Bath basket, right? It's like, I can curl. No surfing here, but I'm gonna ski like nobody's business. It's that kind of stuff. And plus, he was a teacher too. He was an English teacher, and he taught outdoor ed and all these kinds of great things. I mean, they're both still alive. I'm just saying was because he's retired
From teaching.
from teaching. Yeah, he doesn't surf anymore.
Does he curl?
No, he can't really do that stuff anymore. But the other day he was telling me how much he likes remembering doing it.
That's lovely.
Anyone else wondering anything? You can ask me anything. John with the mic, what are you wondering? He's on the spot.
John's working.
Well, I was curious because, and you are married to a filmmaker or
Mm.
partner with a filmmaker, and your books have such a strong visual component to them as well. I was curious about the influence of film on your writing as well, or if there is one.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's funny, like Clive, he's made what they call experimental film or video art, or now he's more like a visual artist, but he comes out of that tradition. And we sort of talk about that kind of stuff all the time. We look at images together a lot. He shows me stuff all the time. Look at this, it's so beautiful. Look at this, I made this, I saw this, I found this. Yeah, and then I think the visual is a huge part of my imagination process. Yeah, I love to go to galleries. I love to watch films. I love to watch really well-made television from Australia, which I've been talking about a lot.
Well, and even your writing process sounds very reminiscent of the act of collage as well. Like
Oh,
you're talking
right.
about the collation of images.
Yeah, and actually, so what happened with Mercy, the first novel, because before that it was short stories, and then Mercy, there were 8 points of view in Mercy, and I was like, what is happening? And crying a lot in the office. I remember lying on the floor in the office, just going, I can't do it, it's impossible. And then Clive, because he had been, come from film, like actual making, Super 8 and 16 mil and cutting film up and putting pieces together, he said, well, why don't you cut it all up, move around the pieces and put them together like you would with a film? And I went, yes, and I did that. And in fact, I've told several writer friends who have been stuck in novels, I've said, I could not do it because I couldn't do that inside here. So I got it outside there. And one friend actually said that she did that because she was so stuck in, I said, try it. She did, and she found that her novel had a second novel curled up in it. And she was like, I got rid of that. I went, boing! And that was the actual novel that was curled up in the corner of the other one that she couldn't see. You guys are awesome. Oh, Marge has a question.
I know you've written one short story lately, and I'm wondering if there are any more short stories.
Yes, I was delighted to publish a story recently in Prairie Fire magazine. One of my earliest publications was in Prairie Fire, and it was so thrilling to do that again. And I very rarely write them. That one I think really came out of the COVID, just thinking about what that was doing to people's lives, and this idea of essential workers. There are people who, oh, well, you've got to go and do it anyway. Even though this is so dangerous and not so dangerous, you got to go on, go. We all need you to go. But mostly what seems to happen is that I get started on a novel and then it just takes everything, and then I recover and I'm started on another one. But I love short stories. I love to read them, and I do love writing them. And I think sometimes when people are learning to write, they think, oh, short stories are easy because they're short. The short story, it takes so much work to write a good short story. It's a really demanding form, which I love, but I don't know if I'll do that many more of them. We'll see. I have ideas for them. I don't know. We've got files.
Anything else, or should we
wrap it up?
wrap it up?
I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Bruce. I want to thank John for having me. Thanks to Miguel Robinson. So nice to see you all here. So nice to be here.
Wow, was that ever an amazing conversation, eh? Will you please like make a rowdy round of applause for Bruce and Alissa? Thank you. That was wonderful. It was so exciting to get a little taste of the novel, but also these kind of curious intersections and also to hear old friends talk about writing. It's really a delight. It feels like we've been welcomed into, you know, a great coffee chat. So
Thank you.
thank you both. It's been really lovely to hear you talk and hear you write it again. It's always nice to have you here.
Thank you.
For those of you who, like, is there one person in here who doesn't know who I am? I feel it's awkward introducing myself again. My name is Charlene Deal. I'm the director of the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. And we partner up with McNally for quite a few events every year. And then we move in here during the festival because we love these guys. I do want to pause for a second though, just to consider how rich a resource this place is and how important it is for all of us in this community to have this place to gather, a place to find new books, a place to hear readers and writers and to be with one another in the midst of stories. And the extraordinary hospitality of this place. And of course, our uber gracious host and event organizer, John, who was always hiding behind everything. But as you know from his intros today, he's also extremely erudite, as well as funny and kind and just unflappable. So a big thanks to McNally Robinson and Dan. They do want you to buy their books, right? So when we all break from here, Alissa will be signing books over by the cash table, and you can get books signed before you pay for them, but you do have to pay for them before you leave the store. It's just this thing, the way they do things here. We will be back a few times over the next few weeks, so I'll just give you a tiny glimpse of who's coming up. Eileen Miles will be here in late April 29th. Thomas Wharton is here May 27th. Camille Hernandez Ramdoir is here on June 3rd. And we just confirmed Sharon Patala, who will be here on June 15th. So it's a really nice spring lineup, enough times to get you out here and excited about what's happening in book world. We're very grateful that Random House has made tonight's event possible. Oh, I forgot one. There's one other thing that's kind of along the side of all this, which is the Rites of Spring poetry reading. We team up with Ariel Gordon and the Winnipeg Free Press for this Rites of Spring project every year. And so we've now closed the submissions window for new poems, but there's going to be 12 poems by Manitoba poets published in the Free Press on April 29th. That in itself is remarkable. I don't know any place else that happens. So we're really thrilled to be part of that partnership, and it'll be a memorable reading, I can tell you that. Lots of the poets who are in that spread every year are having their very first publication experience. So it's a very special time. That's April 29th. You can see all this sort of stuff on the McNally Robinson website, as well as ours. The Winnipeg.ca is the festival site. And thank you all for coming. You know, the rule is that you have to stay here while we transport, Alissa. And every time we gather, I think, what is today's version of transport? I'm waiting for like the litter with, very muscular men who will, and I'm going to hop.
I was promised.
You're promised that? Okay, we're transporting you too?
No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah, this is the only time I've been somewhere where I was told that I would be safely transported to the signing table.
We want you to feel safe
I'm
here, Alissa. We want you to-
There has been some mobbing in the past. That is
This will not happen. Well, it may happen over at the signing table. Anyway, will you please just sit tight for a few
Don't
minutes while
anyone
she goes
move.
over? But
Don't
one
move.
more big round of applause, please, for this wonderful evening.